Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's virtual IoT. Today we have Frédéric Desbiens and Paul Buck, who are going to be taking us through some of the key insights and trends that they found in the IoT Commercial Adoption Survey. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat bar on the side or in the Ask a Question tab on the bottom. And Frédéric and Paul, I'll let you guys take it away.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. I appreciate it. So I'm Frédéric, the program manager for IoT and Edge Computing at the Foundation. And with me today is my boss, Paul Buck. So the topic that we have today is really to get through the results of our commercial adoption survey that we ran. So this is a survey that we ran last year. And essentially, this survey is distinct from the developer survey that we run every year and that we are about to launch for 2020 next week. But before I get to that, I want to attract your attention to an upcoming virtual event that we will be having. So on May 28th, we'll have a full day of presentations on IoT and Edge native topics. And you see the link to the event's website. You cannot register just yet. We will be adding the link for registration very, very soon. But I invite you to have a look at the program and join us on May 28th to learn more about IoT and Edge computing. Now, getting back to this commercial adoption survey. So the goal that we had here was really to do something a bit different than our typical developer survey that we do every year. So the focus was really here to understand the landscape and focus on the requirements, priorities, and challenges that are faced by organizations that are deploying or at least trying to deploy commercial IoT solutions. So we ran the survey from October 7 to December 2nd last year, and we had close to 400 respondents, which for a first edition of that survey is really, really a good turnout. The three working groups that we have are how would I say that? The three working groups that we have in the space, IoT, Edge Native, and Sparkplug, have been involved in this. And going forward, this is a survey that we will have year after year, alongside our developer survey. And as I said, our developer survey will be released next week.
Yeah, these three working groups, Sparkplug and IoT and Edge, they're all synergistic with one another. I mean, they're all in the IoT space, and they're all kind of important points of view that we realize gathering data from an adoption perspective, the kind of applications that we will be built in this space is of value to our communities, our working groups, as well as the industry at large. So, and that's in part why we do these surveys, because of the data, the intelligence that we all gather helps focus our priorities, the working group priorities, project priorities, and we hope your priorities.
Yes, and I think it's important to highlight that that kind of market research is one of the advantages of being a member of the Eclipse Foundation and being a member in the Eclipse IoT Working Group, because we release summary findings in the public, but obviously we share the full data set with our members, which in turn helps them focus their strategy according to the realities of the market. And that's certainly something that we will expand on going forward. So more surveys, more research, and obviously, and hopefully more members going forward.
Yeah, we look forward to the year-over-year comparison as this survey rolls out in the years ahead, including later on this year.
Absolutely.
So just before we continue, I have Liz in the chat, so I'm going to add her into the session, okay?
Yes, fantastic. So yes, we have a surprise guest. So we wanted you participants on this webinar to hear not only from the foundation, but from foundation members. And we have the pleasure to, in a few seconds, welcome Liz Stranger from Red Hat. So Red Hat is a very important member of the Eclipse Foundation. They are a strategic member of the foundation, and they are a strategic member of the Eclipse IoT Working Group. So we are delighted, and hopefully she'll get on screen soon.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just taking a look now. And Paul, I'm going to kick you out for a few minutes while she comes in, and then I'll invite you back. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
No problem at all.
Technical complications. All right. So we'll see if this works.
It should. There we go.
Excellent.
Hello, surprise.
Yes, absolutely, and glad to have you on board. So I said a few words about Red Hat and about the fact that you are here, but maybe before we get further, you want to more fully introduce yourselves to the audience?
Sure, thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here. I was a big supporter of doing this at all because there's a lot of research done on, kind of developers' approach to IoT, and we've really appreciated the Eclipse IoT Working Group's developer survey. But getting this kind of industrial perspective is really, really important. So my name is Liz Strenger, and I lead a team of people at Red Hat focused on emerging technology trends, marketing. And IoT was kind of our first emerging technology trend, about 5 years ago. But we continue, and as you all know, IoT is a place of huge innovation. So I'm always keeping my eye on what's going on with IoT and Edge and fog, et cetera, et cetera.
Fantastic. And I must say, Red Hat is a big contributor to our working group. You are heavily involved in the Eclipse Hono project with Bosch. You are one of the initiators of the forward-looking Eclipse IoT Packages project, where essentially we build Helm charts and stuff like that to enable to run our IoT backends very easily on Kubernetes. So it's great to have this contribution from Red Hat on the call today. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome.
All right. So the way this will work, Liz, and it's really, really simple. So we have the key findings from the survey on this deck. So we'll simply go through it, and whatever takes your attention, please feel free to comment on it. And I would invite the viewers, if you have questions or even comments that you want to share with us, to use the Ask a Question feature of the platform, or simply use the chat, and I will keep an eye on it from time to time and try to spice up the proceedings with what the audience brings to the table. All right? So let's get forward with the first takeaway. So essentially, we found out that more than 60% of the respondents to our survey either are deploying IoT solutions today or will be deploying solutions in the next 24 months. Now, this was pre-COVID, so obviously, if I'm asking this question today, maybe the things will be a bit different. But to me, the COVID-19 health situation is an opportunity for IoT, because if you think about it, you want to automate temperature readings and social distancing as much as possible, and IoT has a big role to play there. So when you see this, Liz, is this surprising to you? Were you expecting more people to do IoT or less, or what's your take on this?
Yeah, so our take, and we do talk to analysts, et cetera, and this is really in keeping with what people saw. So as with any new technology, there was a lot of interest at the beginning, but IoT is hard to do. So the first pilots or proof of concepts or tests that people could figure out Raspberry Pis and connect to a few things around the company. But going to the next phase is hard, and so people are taking a more realistic view. But I completely agree with you, Paul, when I look at the role that smart cities technology will play and has played in monitoring, aggregation of people and traffic, in pedestrian zones, et cetera, video surveillance, all of that is, being put to the test to protect people right now.
Yes, that's so true. And what's really significant for me on this slide is the fact that only 10% of our respondents said that they have no plans to deploy IoT. So there's really real adoption, real growth in that market. And even if, the current circumstances will maybe slow down some projects, I expect this trend, to stay true for many, many years going forward. All right. So let's go ahead with our second finding, which was about essentially the level of spending that people wanted to do. And here, what's really significant to me is when you add the 1 to 10 million and more than 10 million categories on this graph, you get 12% of our respondents that really have already at this point in time a massive investment in IoT. But then even the 30% that invest less than 100K, it's more significant than it is at first sight, because when you think about IoT, one of the great things about it, you talk about Raspberry Pis, sensors, all of those devices are cheap. So you can deploy at a fairly good scale already with only 100K or even 50K investment. So do you think, given the current situation and what you saw on your side of the equation, Liz, that those numbers are in line with what you see?
So Red Hat looks mostly at mid-sized to large enterprises, and so that less than 100,000K to me says that people are planning to do some investigative experimental work, some of these smaller pilots and proof of concepts. So I could see, easily a company trying to do retrofit some smart building stuff going on, some primitive fleet telematics stuff. And believe it or not, we're seeing a resurgence of RFID. Especially RFID has a very important role to play in the supply chain security, in the medical, in the drug, in the pharma industry. So really tracking almost each bottle of pills to make sure that there hasn't been any tampering or theft or something else along the way. So so I would love to know how much RFID stuff is going on in some of those smaller categories. And you can do a lot with Raspberry Pis. I can't tell you how many customers we see that are running IoT on a construction site or a mining site, and they're using Raspberry Pis.
Yeah, and RFID tags, even especially the passive variety, are certainly cheap enough that you can deploy quickly at a large scale as well. And it's interesting that you mentioned healthcare, because once again, this vindicates my viewpoint that COVID-19 is really a catalyst for some types of IoT solutions rather than an obstacle, and that the market will still very good for those kind of solutions, even given the circumstances. And this brings us to the next slide, which is about the growth or the change in investment, that our respondents were planning to do. And what's key for me here, really interesting, is that only 3%, planned to decrease their investment, and 40% on the other side were planning to increase. So to me, this tells that we are past the point of very small POCs and experimentations, that a significant part of the market is ready to move to the next level and really deploy this at scale. Obviously, things are a bit volatile in an investment perspective right now, but at the same time, I think, and once again, the 8% that were not planning to spend anything are probably the ones that were saying that they don't have any plans on the first slide, so this is not surprising. Now, the thing that I wish I had measured, and maybe we can do some brainstorming in real time about what we should do for the next edition. We're asking if they will decrease or increase, but we don't have we don't have the scope of that increase or decrease. So do you agree, Liz, that we should ask about this next year?
Yeah, I do, and I'd love to kind of actually hear what some of the people online think of, like you said, what should be investigated, because I think it would be interesting to know when they have their spend in mind, how much of it is the hardware, how much of it is the connectivity costs, and then of course how much is the software expenditure. That would be very interesting.
Yeah, because that's another thing we don't measure here. They will increase, but are they investing on bigger servers or more sensors or on more software? Yes.
Yeah.
That's all things that I think we should be more granular enough in the next edition. And I said next year, but in fact, the next edition of this commercial adoption survey will be next fall. So this is 2020 as well. So, okay, I'm taking notes there, and that's certainly a good suggestions.
Yeah, I would love to. Can we really just try to get some feedback from people out there? I know that this is we're talking about the commercial economic side of the IoT market, and many of you might be more actual, makers and practitioners and developers and engineers. What kinds of things from your perspective, would you like to see measured?
Yeah, absolutely. So please write this, as a question or in the chat, and we certainly have a look and consider this in making the next edition of the survey, and even discuss it live right now if we have the time. In the meantime, while people are maybe writing their contributions and questions, let's get to the next fact or takeaway, which is the top 5 categories that describe the types of IoT solutions that people have deployed or will deploy when they answer the survey. And here it's really interesting. And of your own, Liz, you mentioned building automation, building retrofit, that kind of stuff. Well, that's our second category here. The first being energy management. And really, there's so much low-hanging fruit there. At a previous job, for example, I was working with a partner that we had, and they had this AI system that you integrated with the heating, ventilation, and cooling system of a building, so HVAC. And together, the AI was predicting the occupancy patterns in the rooms, so that if we know this is Memorial Day coming or Canada Day, whatever, automatically the heating and cooling were modulated to ensure that you weren't heating or cooling for an empty building, essentially. Oh, wow. Yeah, and it's really, really fascinating because you didn't have to do anything. After a few weeks, the system was already able to drive that. And the customer that we had at that time was, just by doing that, making a 7% savings, on their campus of 10 or 20 buildings. I don't remember exactly, but it was a fairly large campus. Once again, we're talking about difficult economic times. So having a look at IoT solutions for energy management like this one would be certainly a good way to cut on expenses there. And then there's the whole smart cities, industrial automation aspect, where essentially, smart cities are cities that are less congested, are better managed, and don't waste energy. So once again, there's, in a public utility perspective, potential savings there. And then there's the next, number 5, agriculture. So agriculture is really interesting because, yes, this is about wasting less water and fertilizers, but at the same time, this is about raising productivity of fields and crops. And in this case, it will probably be important and bring more automation in the field, since we have less workers that are available to do that kind of work in the field. And overall, when you tie all of those 5 teams, this means that IoT has the potential to make a critical contribution to the fight against climate change, because essentially less fertilizer, less waste, less energy wasted, all in all will ensure that we make better use of our resources. So do the categories that you see there, Liz, do they match with the profile of the customers you are working with in the space right now, or are they doing things that are completely different?
No, absolutely very important. We might reorder a little bit, and industrial automation for us is probably higher than building automation. And, agriculture is just, we're constantly surprised by the creativity of people. I remember originally RFID tagging cows was a huge thing. It's still a huge thing, just the metrics that are collected are much more sophisticated and actually used. So I'd say one of the things that we're seeing is the categories that were early to IoT, which these 5 I think are, you can say are early, and please notice that healthcare is not on this list. It is not on our list either, and of the top use cases. But what is changing is maybe is the more sophisticated use of the data. I think a lot of people at first had very minimal expectations of the information they could get from sensors put around, but as you mentioned, the sophistication of the data that was able to, build an AI model that could respond to real time usage is just a perfect example of, people kind of really taking that IoT basic connectivity and data coming into the next level with AI, for example.
And I think the fact that healthcare is not on our list doesn't come from the fact that people are not trying to innovate in healthcare with IoT. It's rather that, at least in my experience with the companies and partners I've worked with in the past, IoT is a very, very regulated sector. And sometimes due to a variety of reasons, but most of them regulatory, it's difficult to very quickly deploy those kinds of technologies in hospitals and other places. And I'm not saying that those regulations are useless or an obstacle to progress, because they are there for a reason. But at the same time, they certainly slow down the rate of change in those in that industry particularly.
I think a perfect example is using the Raspberry Pi versus very contextualized, specialized hardware. You can't just leave a bunch of little Raspberry Pis around a hospital, right? I mean, that's just germ sanitation, etc. So there is an extra barrier, both on the data side, of course, because of the data privacy things, but also on the physical. And one of the things that I really attracts me to IoT is you can't ignore the physical and you can't ignore the digital. So, you really have to, when you're designing a system, consider both pieces. And I know that kind of translates into the OT-IT gap that we see, but it's that both sides are absolute necessities.
Yes, that makes sense. All right. Going forward now with our next takeaway. And this is about the use of open source in the projects. So to me, it's really fascinating to see that only 14% of respondents to our survey said that they are looking purely at proprietary solutions. So when we say open source, has eaten the word, literally, I think there's proof right there. And even those 14%, I mean, the proprietary solutions that they are looking at probably rely on a very large number of open source components. So, I mean, open source really won. Now, obviously, there's a share of the market that are looking purely at open source, and then people that are looking at a mix. Red Hat obviously has been a early disruptor in the market with its open source business model. So if we have people on the call or listening to this webinar that are thinking about building IoT solutions, what would you recommend at the business model level to them when considering the components and licenses and open source approach they should have?
So that's a really good question. One of the main issues around kind of pricing or figuring out the economic footprint of an IoT solution is the fact that you have so many devices running different pieces or different levels of hardware and doing different levels of software, and doing different computation. So one of the things that Red Hat has done, because we have a subscription model, is that we can be very flexible in pricing Red Hat Enterprise Linux according to the amount of work a particular device is doing. So we have tiered pricing that ranges from, full-on cluster at the edge all the way to a relatively smart device. We don't go all the way to the Raspberry Pi level. We can functionally, but we don't from a business model. But in general, I think the one of the real advantages to open source software is precisely that vendors can deliver services, support services in a more flexible way that might allow you to make some savings or better rationalize the cost of IoT. I'd kind of like to just put in a little plug for one of the best, what we have found, what our customers have found is one of the real advantages of using open source based software is that, open source, all the APIs are completely public. There's no secrets. So when you want to plug in different modules or different pieces of open source software in a stack, it's much less difficult if you have as much open source software as possible. Yes. So that's that point.
Yeah, that's an important point to highlight, because when you bring an IoT solution, whatever it is, you enter into people's workplaces and homes. And the first question you will be asked about your solution is, what guarantees me that this device is not spying on me? This device is actually doing what you say it does. And open source is the most powerful argument or answer you can give to that question, because if your code is open source, or at least the core, then you can, if your customer cannot analyze it themselves, they can hire somebody who will be able to read the code and validate what it is doing. And at the same time, there's a finding that we didn't put into this deck, but that was really interesting in the survey, where we explicitly asked people, why are you choosing open source? Okay. And for those who answered the question, essentially the first answer was not price or cost. It was flexibility. The fact that you can really customize a code base to a specific use case is really a difference maker in that market. And so, yes, cost is important, obviously, and especially in those troubled days, but the flexibility was the number one that was mentioned. And the third one, I think, was control. Yes, so not only it's more flexible, but you have more control over what you put into your product. And then there's the dimension of open hardware as well. I think RISC-V, for example, that ecosystem, and especially with our partner organization, the Open Hardware Group, they are making great strides in offering designs that are open. So not only you are sure that your software stack is not spying on you, but you can certify that the CPU and other support components will do the right thing as well. And I think going forward, that would be more and more important as a trend in the market, for sure.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of work with programmable FPGAs. So, again, and making sure that the tool chain to program those FPGAs is open source. So you really, as you mentioned, you really can now look into the hardware architecture So that's a very important point also. And I just want to put in the point that I'm sure there are some MBAs somewhere, finance, PhDs that have figured out the cost model for flexibility.
Yes, certainly. And well, that could be a very, if we can find an interesting one, or one of those specialists or researchers willing to speak about this, it would be, I think, a fantastic follow-up meetup to this one.
Can I just pause for a second? I feel so bad. I didn't mean to displace Paul Buck. Do you want to
I think there's a technical limitation with the platform where you can have only 4 speakers, but my screen share is one of the speakers, so to speak.
Oh.
So once I stop sharing my screen, it will be able to come back.
And Paul said that you take priority over him, so we're okay. Leave him out.
I'm overshadowing my boss, and is writing the letter to fire me in the meantime.
Well, this was everyone's opportunity to bring that long hook from the old, vaudeville shows and pull me off screen. So if you're not doing that yet, I'm very happy to continue. This is a really interesting conversation. Thank you.
So yes, so what we can do then is get a bit faster through the rest of the deck and have Paul back on screen and exchange with us at the end for sure. So in that spirit, takeaway 6. So we asked people what their preferred pricing model was for the consumption of IoT platform and services. And here, I must say, answers were a bit all over the place, with per device being the top one, but not by a huge margin. But to me, this highlights something interesting. In the past, I've been working with organizations that were trying to price such services. Well, I was in mobile at the time, not IoT, but the market dynamics are the same. We wanted to, or at least my bosses at the time wanted to invoice their customers according to the number of transactions that the backend was processing. Because it was a cloud service supporting mobile devices. And I told them, essentially, this is a bad idea because this is not predictable in the sense you are thinking about the deployment for your 500 employees. You don't have an idea in advance of how many transactions, so it's very difficult for them to make the proper financial planning to deploy. And so it's better maybe to have a per device or per CPU or whatever model, because this is something that they can evaluate a bit easier. But what do you think of all of this, given that you have not only licenses at Red Hat, but you have a host of cloud services as well that you are trying to price in the market, and working with IBM with that as well?
Yes. So as you can guess, we landed in the hybrid model. Not all of Red Hat's portfolio is priced the same way. So much of it is priced per core. And you should really laugh if you looked at our IBM pricing chart, because there for System Z, we have, I think, 3 different pricing models just for that one System Z. So, it gets rather complicated. But what we realized is that, again, we really wanted to give people as much flexibility in, if they wanted to deploy a fog-like architecture where they have cascading compute resources, big machines here, smaller, that we have our edgier, closer to the far edge pricing is more per device, and the more traditional, edge servers back up to the remote clusters is done still per node, per core. So it is all over the place. And one of the things that I think that customers get a little bit surprised by is when they do implement some of these multi-core machines and sort of didn't calibrate their pricing model for that, it's not just a server. You can't, most software companies don't let you just kind of say, okay, here, it's a giant refrigerator, but it's still just a server. And so it is that concept of compute resources that are being consumed, whether by transactions or any other measure, it's still a fundamental part of the equation of pricing, because it determines your hardware selection, which affects your pricing. Did that help? Was there any other?
That certainly makes sense to me, and at the same time, it's really a tricky question. I think the key here is to ensure, if you are yourself a provider of IoT solutions, that you should be transparent about the model and don't make changes. How to say that on a whim, without any notice or little notice. Mm-hmm. I remember one particular vendor at some point where decided, very abruptly, that instead of considering, let's say you had a virtualized cluster, so instead of charging you for the number of VMs or containers that were running their product, they were charging you for the whole cluster or the whole machine, because of the VM, the ability to move VMs, that kind of stuff. So they wanted to charge you for the whole thing because of that single capability instead of what you were actually consuming. And I think, okay, it's tempting to charge more. More money is always good, but it's a bit unfair to the customer to, one, arrive with changes like that on a whim, and two, to charge for something that the customer isn't really using.
Right. Well, and that's like a dark negative example of the tag associated with flexibility, right? Because you could theoretically do something, you're paying the premium price. And I completely ignored the cloud services aspect to the question, but I think that is as confusing for us as it is for you out there, right? Is how do you really calculate how much an IO using cloud services in the distributed computing scenario that all IoT pieces are? And we have customers that, we used to think it was edge to cloud, jumping around different tiers of the edge and then eventually going to the cloud. But we've actually traced a lot of patterns of how the cloud is consumed along the way, the journey back from far edge all the way back to cloud or data center. And people are hopping up and down from the cloud, right? So they use the cloud for device management, but then they'll use the cloud for data analytics on the back end or something in the middle. And they will even use different clouds providers for different pieces. So I think that maybe this is good for us, that pricing considerations are still so difficult to work out for for businesses, right? That they want to solve a problem, they solve the problem, and then the price tag they realize 6 months later.
I hate to have to use a calculator or something like that, and with sometimes metrics that are not necessarily made up, but difficult to figure out in advance when you are still building the solution. So I think more innovation in that department is probably needed going forward, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Getting forward with our next finding, which is, the IoT Cloud Strategy. So essentially, are people more targeting public cloud, hybrid, or private? And in this case, to me, that's not really surprising, the fact that an hybrid approach with some on-premises, some public cloud is preferred, especially since when we talk industrial IoT or even healthcare or stuff like that, you want, in most cases, to keep control over your data, or at least the version of the data that has all the personal information or industrial secrets, in the case of industrial automation, that you want to keep for yourself. And on the other end of the scale, we see that multi-cloud is not necessarily widely deployed, which is probably something that we'll see to increase, because if you tie yourself to a single cloud provider, there's a potential danger there. But people are still, probably doing business with a primary provider, and that's it. for the time being. So anything surprising in those numbers for you, Liz?
Yeah, I actually am surprised by the private cloud number.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very glad to see that, and that fits in exactly with the control aspect that you mentioned. And I do know that even rather simple factories are very, very hesitant to let the data leave their private network. Because of espionage, etc. So yeah, no, that's very interesting. So I'll have to look back at what our customer use cases are around that.
So and that's an important thing that you highlight, in the sense that traditionally there's been a big divide between operational technology, so what you have on the factory floor, this network that drives your robots and whatnot. And then on the other side, information technology, which is the traditional domain where Red Hat is operating. So what's your story to those organizations that want to drive industrial automation without compromising the security of their industrial secrets? What do you have to tell them?
Well, we do tell them, use your private network. That's there are very large and complex factories that have the private network, and I think a lot of people initially just said, "Oh, we can't do IoT because we're not allowed to send our data to the internet." I think that people have to really think of connectivity, the infrastructure that you use to make the information flow. You have many options now, and more. So I think that's becoming less of a mystery to businesses. I think they understand that there are ways for them to secure their data exchange. But it is a problem, and let's face it, we do know that IoT is very easy to hack. Primarily because even though everyone says security is a prime concern, very few, at least our data has shown that that's not where people are spending their money. So there's still very many unsecured, and some say unsecurable, devices out there on the edge. But open source is coming up with projects to address trusted boot systems, and really kind of extend that introspection of devices all the way out to the edge, both hardware and software tampering.
And this highlights what you just said, probably the important role that edge computing has to play, in the sense that it would probably be risky to expose an old programmable logic controller talking Modbus or BACnet or a thing like that to the public internet, or even to a network that's somehow connected to the public internet. But then the edge node can be the local point of contact to isolate the vulnerable infrastructure, so you don't have to rip everything off in your factory in order to modernize and do industrial IoT. Edge computing is a powerful enabler there.
Yes, it's almost like implementing a firewall type mentality between those insecurable devices and the devices that have more immediate connection to your enterprise systems. So you kind of write off the devices that you just simply can't protect, and make sure that your tier that's closer to the core is executing all the privacy policies and encryption, decryption, etc.
Yes, that makes sense. All right. Going forward to our next takeaway. So we asked respondents to rank the relative importance of several technology components in their IoT solution. And here, if we look just at the orange bars, so the high importance items, we see sensors are obviously an important concern, followed by the cloud platform. And then on the other hand, actuators I've seen a lower ranking there in the people's choices. So to me, this indicates that people are still I would say, build level 1 IoT solutions in the sense that you measure something. But then actual automation requires actuators which, interact, they are a bridge between the software and the physical world. And we are not there yet. Anything else surprising you in the findings there, Liz?
Just sad that the edge nodes gateways usage ranking of importance is still low, because that is your point of we recommend to our customers to use that concept of a gateway as your point of defense in security. And for people that really just want to go to the sensor actuators back to the cloud, we say that at least in your cloud, implement a virtual gateway that can act as your security hub, if you will. Yeah. I have to laugh, however, at the AI/ML. At Red Hat, we have what's called innovation leadership teams, nice corporate language for a group of, kind of a tiger team of specialists across the company that are focused on topics. We have an AI/ML one, we have an edge one, and just last week, we're like, do we need an AI on the edge one? My head exploded, but I'm waiting to see what the wiser people come up with. But it is becoming very, very much merged. And just for the example that you pointed out with the building automation, is you've got the data now, do something with it. And so the AI/ML is a natural next step.
Yeah, and to me, in the case of edge nodes and gateways, yes, it's fairly low if we look at the orange, but if you have the dark blue on the top, you see that it's pretty significant. It's maybe that simply people are busy scaling up their things, and so when you have a very simple deployment, maybe you don't need edge, but as you scale, you don't have a choice, you need it. In the case of AI/ML, I think that, the main obstacle is, if you take something like TensorFlow or whatever, or any of the easy-to-use cloud platforms they are easy to use in a coding perspective. You interact with TensorFlow, with the Python, for example. So I know Python, you know Python, everybody in the industry knows Python. The problem is I'm not good, I don't have the mathematical skills to figure out how to build the model, how to translate this messy real-world data in a numerical representation that will make sense to the statistical algorithms that I will deploy. Yeah. And so there's a lack of skill there, and that's probably the biggest gap that we have to fulfill as an industry to make this a reality as a trend, for sure.
Yeah, so we were talking about IT, OT, and now we have the data scientist in play. Yes. So, you can be very smart and walk and talk like a data scientist, but to think like one, you do have to have that mathematical model. But people are getting better now at you can find in the open source world, models built that are, kind of preset. And so you won't have the competitive advantage of having developed a unique model to your data, but there are certain data sets that are pretty standard or regulated. So you could try out some of these prefabbed models for yourself. The other thing that I think that will help IoT adopt AI faster than most other things is that the scope is limited. If you limit your AI/ML projects to the data, the IoT data, you have a predictable data set that needs less cleansing, less preparation, and you have a limited problem set. So you're not trying to figure out how to, intelligently run the enterprise. You're trying to figure out how to intelligently run, a piece of a city or a piece of a building.
Yes, and I think a third key to growth in that department would be to provide to the market tools and solutions that are built on languages and tool sets they are comfortable with. And that's why we've got at the Eclipse Foundation the Deep Learning for J project. So instead of converting to Python or whatever, you can now use enterprise Java and integrate in your existing workloads, this capability to design and run neural network simulations and stuff like that. So to me, that's also an important part of the equation, because we don't have the time to always to learn new tools. So to have this capability to built on what you already know is certainly an important factor as well.
Yes.
All right. Getting to takeaway 9, and here, no big surprise, the top 3 cloud platforms that people consider, and in the typical order, AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. What's been surprising to me on this slide is, yes, they are in their typical order, but when you consider cloud-native apps or even enterprise apps on the cloud, the percentage differences between those 3 players are typically larger. Now we see them in a tighter pack, which means to me that there's no definitive winner in the public cloud space for IoT right now. 10% difference between 2 competitors. That's something that Google could fill the gap, in a year or 2, and given their current growth, maybe less than that. And obviously, we have a whole host of smaller players that were behind. And IBM was one of the stronger ones. I don't remember the percentages, but anything else that surprises you there?
No surprise at all.
Yeah, exactly. I should have asked that.
No, I know. AWS kind of led the pack with really bringing the cloud down to earth with its ability to kind of really work on the edge and devices. So no surprises there, but I could definitely see the other 2 catching up.
Yeah, and there's lots of interesting things happening. At the same time, the one thing that worries me, but that's maybe just my own personal experience and the projects I worked on in the past. I mean, it's great to have those easy to use IoT services on the cloud, but at the same time, if you really standardize on one of those services, you have a very powerful lock-in on your whole solution there. And if the pricing at some point becomes less favorable, it's a bit tricky. So to me, the key, and this is something we've been trying at the foundation, is to adopt standards, for at least your backbone, so that you can eventually adopt a different backend at some point, and you're not tied up into. So MQTT is a good example there as a protocol, right. And that's why we are working with some of those players to have them implement the spot log protocol, which goes on the top of MQTT and brings additional features and value.
Yeah.
Do you get a lot of those questions about lock-in?
Oh, very much. I mean, one of Red Hat's key messages is use open source to prevent vendor lock-in. And while we partner very well with the 3 cloud providers, and now, of course, IBM for obvious reasons that, we are part of IBM, we still really recommend considering containers on the Kubernetes architecture. Because if you run a container if you run containers, you at least technically have the ability to pull your containers down from a certain cloud provider and deployed it on your own cloud or on another provider. So you've encased all the technical dependencies that you have around your services, microservices, and maybe whole applications by using that container. So we recommend that people consider very, very strongly using containers. And even if they're not on the cloud yet, still use containers, because someday you may want to go to a cloud or your own cloud with a certain service. So yeah, no, that's absolutely the case. And one of the things that we find is the proliferation of data on the cloud. You really need to understand that moving your data back down from the cloud is expensive and it's complicated. And so people should, just be aware of how much data they're actually storing in the cloud. Is there really the necessity to put all of that in the cloud, or is there a more cost-efficient way of storing that data?
Certainly, and I think you're making a powerful argument here about portable IoT backends like the ones we have at the foundation and where Red Hat is a contributor. If we think about Eclipse Hono as an IoT messaging mechanism, and with the rest of the projects that we have. So it's certainly, and especially with the IoT packages project now, where it's much easier to deploy an Eclipse IoT-based backend on any cloud supporting Kubernetes, then I think as a community we are headed in the right direction and executing on the strategy that you just highlighted. Now, going forward, another takeaway of the survey was that, well, Eclipse IoT is the most important industry group for the respondents to our survey. At the same time, I mean, there's a self-selection bias there. I'm honest. Yes, we love the slide, and at the same time, we are honest enough to say, well, this was an Eclipse-sponsored survey, so obviously we have more Eclipse-loving people. But to me, the one thing that I would highlight is that we don't see ourselves in competition with Apache, the Linux Foundation, and other players, because we work with them all the time. We are members of the CNCF, the Linux Foundation, through their Zephyr or RTOS project. They are members of Eclipse IoT and vice versa. So certainly, we all have our little agendas, but at the same time, we try overall to strengthen the larger open source IoT ecosystem there. Anything to say about this, Liz?
Yeah, we also are big supporters of all three and big consumers and contributors to all three. But I do want to just say a short story of why Red Hat chose to kind of double down on the Eclipse IoT Working Group for its own IoT efforts. And we have several of our really talented engineers working. They do all of their coding and all of their development in the Eclipse IoT, right? We don't have a source code because it's a control system at Red Hat. Everything is in the community. But when we looked around at which communities we thought would have an edge in IoT, we really recognized the fact that the Eclipse Foundation had an excellent track record of incubating open source projects that really eventually made a difference in commercial offerings. So the Red Hat path is a path where is one path, but Bosch, right, and even GE were really key contributors because they saw Eclipse IoT projects as advancing their own technology innovation, their own engineering. And so it's this kind of beautiful symbiotic relationship. And it was also, it turned out, because so many commercial entities were committed to this Eclipse IoT Working Group, it fostered a lot of great partnerships for us with Bosch and with Eurotech. Many of the contributors, we work together on building this technology.
And we certainly appreciate the support, Liz. Thank you so much for that. And at the same time, I think it's interesting what you said, in the sense that certainly, yes, in an IoT perspective, we certainly have the most active and largest collection of projects that are purely dedicated at IoT concerns, and we have building blocks for nearly all the important protocols and all of that. And at the same time, I think what you said highlights a key difference that any vendor neutral organization makes, in the sense that not every open source project is the same. Not all open source is the same, in the sense that it's one thing to have a vendor controlled open source project like some do, and that's pivotal. And it's one thing when you compare, let's say, the Spring ecosystem versus what we do here, but to have a vendor neutral third party like the foundation makes a big difference, because essentially it's a level playing field. We are literally the referees of this game, not playing favorites with any player, and trying to work with everyone to push the tech and at the same time promote the commercial activities of our members, because in the end somebody needs to pay the bills. And certainly we are pretty much commercial friendly, in the sense that open source is a passion for me, but it's not a religion, in the sense that to have great commercial and successful commercial products on the top of the core that we offer is certainly something that I value and we all value at the foundation very much. So I think that's really great things that you highlighted there. All right.
Oh no.
That's takeaway 11 now, and we are we are at time, so we'll need to get very quickly through this. But essentially, the top 3 concerns and priorities for people deploying IoT solutions, and this is completely in line with our developer survey. And those 3 have been the top 3, I think, for a while now. But security as the first. What is interesting to me on this one is performance. Performance as number 2. Typically, when you deploy an initial deployment, performance is important, but not on the forefront, because you want things to work at the functional level, and then you will optimize. And we all say that premature optimization is the root of all evil in software. And certainly, I think the survey vindicates that viewpoint there. But to me, the fact that performance is number 2 is that we have many IoT deployments that are maturing, and now after deployment, people are saying, okay, we need to tweak this to consume less power, to raise the throughput or whatever. Anything else to say there?
Totally agree. I was completely surprised by performance because for years people were just happy if the little light flashed. They didn't care if it took 5 minutes for the little light to flash. But people, I think the performance is becoming important because the IoT applications are becoming more mission critical.
Yes, and certainly I'm expecting that to grow over time. So I wouldn't be surprised in a few years when we come back to this survey and performance would be the number 1. Once we have taken care properly of the security concerns that are so important. And in that perspective, what would you say to a potential IoT adopters that is maybe a bit scared of the security aspects of all of this?
That you're right to be scared, but with the best approach is risk mitigation. So from the very beginning, from the very time you first, plug device A into some connection, really plan for security up front. It will be much less expensive. You will find more kind of native, low-level ways to secure things, so that you're not retrofitting some kind of complex and expensive security harness on top of your IoT system after you've kind of worked out the other kinks. So just put that security up front, the security thinking up front, and really, consider network security, data security, and again, let's not forget the physical reality of these devices. So it's not always some hacker; it can be a bulldozer that accidentally rolls over.
Yeah. And that was, I think, yes, our last finding for the day. So we have a little summary there that people can read of their own. Before we maybe get to the next stage of the discussion, I'd like to thank attendees and invite them to join the working group. Certainly join Red Hat, Eurotech, Bosch, and all the others, including IBM in this working group, and work on the open source ecosystem with us. So we've got a Twitter account and website. Now I will stop sharing this. Maybe Vanessa, you can bring Paul back for at least the end, so he can say goodbye to the others. But
and I'll say thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you. All right, let me bring Paul back in.
And if you have any questions or comments in the audience, please share them through the stack. I think, well, it was only the three of us or the 2 of us speaking all the time. But if you have any more concerns or reactions to the survey, we're more than happy to air them. So glad to have you back, Paul. So anything surprising in what we said, or anything that
No, all good. Learned a lot from Liz. Glad you're able to join the discussion today. And thanks to everybody that joined the session today online. It was, hope you found it informative. And stay connected and join us at Eclipse IoT.
Yes. And if you didn't have already, you can download the deck with the key findings using the big green button at the bottom of the screen. This will bring you directly to the download page. And well, if there aren't any questions or comments from the audience, then I think we are good. So, well, thank you, Liz, for making it. We really appreciate it. This was a last-minute thing that we organized, but we are glad you could make it. And thank you so much, Paul, for well, being around as well. Really appreciate it. All right.
No problem at all. Thank you, Frédéric.
So no questions.
Thanks, everyone.
So I think we are done. So, well, thank you, Vanessa, for your support in running behind the scenes this broadcast. And well, we are looking forward to the next time. We don't have one scheduled yet, but I will be working really hard on that. In the meantime, please join our virtual event on May 28th, where we have speakers from most of the very active members of Eclipse IoT and Eclipse Edge Native, including Ted Ross from Red Hat, that will talk to us about Project Copper, a very important initiative at Red Hat, which is about essentially making edge systems being able to talk to each other without VPNs and all of that of complicated stuff. So please listen to that. It will be a very interesting presentation. So thank you everyone again for joining, and well, see you next time, Liz.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye for now.